Good morning, church. So I am not much of a prop preacher, but I've got props for today, and maybe you saw me up here setting them up. If you can't see it, on stage I have several mouse traps. I set these after kids' praise time, don't worry. We don't have a mouse problem here, to my knowledge. Instead, I'm going to need a volunteer. Wow, John, just shooting up. You don't even know what I'm asking you to volunteer for. Well, I want to ask Grant to come up. But I'm going to tell Grant what he's volunteering for. I'll be nice. This volunteer is going to be blindfolded. I don't have a blindfold. I do have a mask, which works just as great. Put that on. It's clean. Can you see anything? And you are going to make an attempt to make it across the stage without stepping on any mouse traps. Think you can do that?
Hope so.
And if not, his parents here, they are aware of any liability, etc. Keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle at all times. So Grant, you don't have to start just yet, because I'm going to ask you, I forgot to mention, I'm going to tell you which way to go. Does that make it feel a little better? So, with my guidance, you will probably not step on any mouse traps. Cool?
Okay.
I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm not promising it. But I'm going to do my best. You just have to trust me and listen to me. So Grant, take one step forward. That's a good step. Take a bigger step. Okay, another one. No, okay. Go to the right.
How far?
However feel you want to go. Whoa, no, that's too much. Yep, I didn't tell you to go to the left. Okay, 2 steps to the left. Okay, can you tilt? Let's see here. Go like, okay, go forward 1 step. Okay. Can you like pivot? There we go, great. 1 small step forward. Another one. Okay. All right, one medium step to the left. Oh, no, you're my left. Sorry. Okay, you're right. There we go. We're almost there. 1 big step forward. Now let's do a small step back. 3 steps to your right. Yeah. Oh, nope, that's the podium. 1 step forward. 1 step to the left. Another step to the left. 1 step forward. Okay, whoa. 1 step to the right. 1 step forward. 1 step forward. Oh, you hit that a little bit to the left. There we go. And 1 more step. And you did it. Congratulations. All right. Thank you, sir. Do you want to keep the mask? All right. Woo. All right. Thank you, Grant. I'm going to tell you something. That'll make you maybe, I don't know if it make you angry. I didn't actually set these. Woo! Because I didn't want to unset them. Okay, so this was a humorous little demonstration. But that was probably a little unnerving for Grant, maybe a little frustrating, because it wasn't the most direct path through the mousetraps. They probably wondered, okay, why were they led that way? And why were there mousetraps anyway? What was the point of all that? Why were they blindfolded? So these are all very good questions that if Grant wants to ask me, I'll answer them. But in our lives, we can't always see where we're going. We don't know if the next step that we take is going to be fine, or if we're going to step on a mousetrap or something worse. Life can be like a minefield. And maybe you can see through this illustration, and you can jump to the conclusion, which is that we need to trust God to guide us through life. But that's often easier said than done. God doesn't always lead us in ways that we would like God to and that we think God should. And those questions that we have can be very real. Why doesn't God send us on a straightforward, easy path through life? Why are there hardships and struggles and pain? And sometimes we are going to step on the metaphorical mousetrap. We will experience pain in this life one way or the other. Why doesn't God lead us away from all of it? And is God really trustworthy after all? Some Christians find these questions too uncomfortable to ask, but God's people have been openly wrestling with those questions for thousands of years. We're seeing that as we go through the story, which is a series of lessons, 31 lessons, that's going to be taking us through the Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation and beyond. Because the story doesn't end there, but it continues on to today. This is our story too. Understanding the overarching story of the Bible helps us to understand our place in it too, and what God is doing in our lives, in our stories. Now, as we know, the world has changed a lot in the last few thousand years. But the relationship between God and humanity hasn't. Last week we talked about Abraham and his family, including Jacob, who was given that name Israel, which means wrestles with God. Because that's what he literally did. But his descendants were given that name as they would wrestle and struggle with God too. And today we're going to be talking about one of Joseph's 12 sons, a man by the name of Joseph. Joseph was one of the youngest of the 12 sons, but the firstborn to Jacob's beloved wife, Rachel. And unlike most parents, Jacob showed favoritism. And it was clear that Joseph was the favorite son. And the others didn't really appreciate that, especially when Jacob gave Joseph a gift. It was a coat of many colors, or ornate robe, as the NIV puts it, or amazing Technicolor dream coat, as Andrew Lloyd Webber puts it. But throughout his life, Joseph was a dreamer. He had the gift of visions and interpreting dreams, which he did throughout his life. And he had two dreams that were more or less about his brothers bowing down before him and Joseph ruling over them. And for the brothers, that was the last straw for them. This story begins in Genesis 37, and at this point, the Bible already has several cases of jealous siblings, most notably Cain and Abel, and then Jacob and Esau. There was animosity and violence between brothers, where there should instead be peace and love. But jealousy and envy are the result of what we saw in the beginning there in the garden. At the root of sin is self-centeredness. It is the question, but what about me? That question led Cain to kill his brother. And it almost led the sons of Jacob to kill their brother Joseph, but they spared him, instead beating him, tossing him into a pit, and then selling him into slavery in Egypt. But Jacob didn't know this, though. And he felt that same agony which Adam and Eve felt as they mourned Abel. But from that pit, the rest of Joseph's life was a roller coaster. In Egypt, Joseph was falsely accused of a crime and sent to prison. And from his jail cell, he continued to dream, and his reputation as a dreamer spread until one day he was brought before Pharaoh himself and asked to interpret the king's dream. A famine is coming, he revealed. and rewarded with a high position in Pharaoh's court. Years passed until Joseph encountered his brothers once again. When they came to Egypt looking for food, escaping this great famine, but they didn't recognize their brother. He revealed himself to them, said, "Hey, it's me, Joseph." And of course, they were terrified because no one had forgotten what happened to Joseph. They remembered what they did to him, and they trembled. But instead of getting revenge on his brothers, he assured them that he wasn't angry. He didn't ask that question, "But what about me?" He didn't seek payback or retribution. Instead, he explained to them how he had found peace in his life. He said to them one of the most profound statements of faith in the Bible, found right at the end of Genesis in chapter 50. Verse 19 tells us, "But Joseph said to them, 'Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives.'" I want to sit with that passage for a bit today, because it is this profound statement of faith. But it is wisdom and peace that Joseph had gained in hindsight, at reflecting on the twisting, arduous path that his life had taken. As he looked on all of the things that he experienced, he struggled. Was it all because of God? Was God the reason that Joseph's brothers harmed him? That is to say that God wanted Joseph to be sold into slavery, to live such a difficult life? No, I don't think that's what Joseph believed. It's not what I believe either. But it's a popular idea among Christians who believe that even tragedies are intentional acts of God, which leads to the question, does God cause bad things to happen? Is God at the root of all of these things? Does God put down mousetraps for us to step on? And if so, is God really a good and benevolent, loving God that we can trust? Now, this is what we call the problem of suffering. It is one that God's people have been wrestling with for generations, and I won't claim to have the solution, and that one sermon will be able to explain it all away, because I don't think we can. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? I will say this, that what we've seen in the story so far is that it wasn't like this in the beginning. This is not the perfect world that God created or desires for it to be. God created us in love, and He created us to love. Many terrible things happen because we don't do that, because of what we do to one another. But all of creation is affected by what happened so long ago. Some things just happen because we live in a broken world. Natural disasters and diseases are part of the world that we live in, a world which is wounded and feeling the effects of sin. The world didn't do anything. We did that. This world wasn't always this way, and it won't always be this way. And we have hope for the world to come, but until then, this is what we have. Is God to blame? I don't believe so. That one's on us. We saw that at the very beginning of the story, Genesis 3. It's the consequences of sin and imperfection that come from that first bad decision in the garden, which forced us to leave Eden. We set the mousetraps, and we have been suffering ever since. right. So where's God in all of this? What is God doing about it? I don't believe that God desires bad things to happen to us, but I also don't believe that God is ignorant or uncaring either. That's an idea called deism. Deists believe that God created the world and left it to do its own thing, as if he was setting up a wind-up toy and just letting it go, remaining totally uninvolved. I'm not a deist. My comfort comes not from the belief that everything, including evil, happens for a God-ordained reason, but in all things, in all circumstances, God is at work for good. God can take a bad thing and find a way to bring about good from it. God is not the author of tragedies. God is the redeemer of tragedies. So going back to Joseph, no, God didn't want Joseph to be sold into slavery, but God was able to bring about good from it. And as a result, the nation that God was building through Abraham's descendants was saved. Looking to the New Testament, one of the central verses in this conversation is Romans 8:28, which Nathan read earlier. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And if we had more time, I would love to just read the whole chapter of Romans 8, because it's hard to understand just one verse apart from its context. But allow me to sum it up. Basically, what Paul is talking about here is our present sufferings. We suffer because we live in a creation, he says, is groaning in frustration because of its bondage to decay, ever since the fall of man. But it won't always be this way. Creation in its entirety will be liberated when the children of God will be revealed and glorified. And this is what allows Paul and his fellow Christians to have hope in the midst of suffering. They await with eager expectation because they know that God is bringing healing to this wounded world. They have faith that the author of the story will bring it to a happy ending, and that in doing so, we join the faith of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and so many more people of faith throughout the story. Looking at our stories today, not all things in this world are good, and because of that, we suffer. All of us have. But in both good and bad things, God is not leaving us alone like that deist God, but God is moving us forward along with all of God's creation towards God's intended goal of glory and perfection. Our story is bound for a happy ending, and so is all of the world. It is a future which Revelation describes as being without tears, without mourning, without death. There will be no more sickness, no more natural disasters, no more death. And that is how Paul got through his suffering and found peace, and how Joseph was able to find peace, that was able to forgive his brothers. It is by believing that even when things go terribly and unexplainably wrong, God can redeem our tragedies and bring about good from the bad. And that ultimately, when all is said and done, it will all end in the best way possible. And that is the promise of God. God doesn't promise us prosperity or extra blessings for being a good Christian. God doesn't promise that we won't encounter tragedies or heartbreak or the mousetraps of life. Instead, God promises us that God's power is greater and that God can make our stories better. God promises us that it won't always be this way, and that God is actively working on restoring creation to how it's supposed to be. It is the promise of redemption, of reconciliation. It is the promise of resurrection. It is the promise of hope. That no matter what tragedies you've experienced or how hard your story has been, that is not how your story will end. Our stories will end better than that. And we may not always be able to see it, and it may not always make sense. But through it all, we trust God to lead us through to the end. We have so much more of the story to go through, but we do so with the end in sight. Because all of the people in the story did. They clung to the hope that there will come a time when suffering will be gone, when God Himself will wipe every tear from our eyes. God promises us that when we mourn, we will be comforted. God promises us that when we feel like we just can't take it anymore, and when we can't take one more step, when we're afraid to take another step because we don't know what we're going to step on, when we feel like we're heavy laden, and when we just give up or want to give up as we labor in this broken world, we can come to Jesus and that He will give us the rest that we need. For to you, He said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." That is the gospel that we are preaching. And the good news that we are proclaiming not just with our words, but with our lives. May the world around us, may our neighbors, may our friends, may they know the peace and the hope that our God can give, and which we are clinging to. And if you are here today and you want to know more about God's story and to find your place in it, we would love to tell you more. You can be baptized and join in the eternal story of God's people. And if you are struggling today, if you can call yourself Israel, the most important thing that I can tell you is that you are not alone. By no means. And if you are in need of prayer, if you are in need of encouragement, if God can minister to you through us, please let us know. You can find me, one of our elders, or one of our Stephen ministers, and they can pray with you right now. But just please remember, you are not alone. And in all things, church, may God and our God alone receive all glory and honor and praise. Amen.